the commandments of God. So when we begin a discussion of the commandments of God, you might wonder, well, why is the first question, what is charity? And why not just give us the first commandment, right? Well, the reason they're doing it is that all the commandments are summed up in charity. Charity is the virtue that allows you to love God with your whole heart, your whole mind, your whole soul, etc., and your neighbor as yourself for love of God. Okay? So every commandment is summed up in that. If you love God above all things and your neighbor as yourself because God wants you to love your neighbor as yourself, then that is a summary of every commandment. Like, if you love God and you want to keep his do his will, and you love your neighbor, you're not going to steal anything from anybody, right? Because if you love your neighbor because God wants you to love him as yourself, then how could you steal and cause them harm? You wouldn't kill, you wouldn't steal, you wouldn't adulter, you wouldn't do any of those things if you were charitable. So that's why we start out with that thing. Now, so what is charity? Well, I could have just said it, right? Charity is a supernatural virtue, a supernatural gift of God by which we love God above all things and our neighbor as ourselves for God's sake. Why must we love God? Well, because he is infinitely good in himself and infinitely good to us. Must we show that we love God? How do we show? We show that we love God by keeping his commandments. For Christ says, if you love me, keep my commandments. What are the two great precepts of charity? They are, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with thy whole heart and with thy whole soul and with thy whole mind and with thy whole strength. And thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So, if you have that charity, you will not violate any commandment, because it would be impossible to love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, and your whole mind, and your whole strength, and your neighbor as yourself, and do anything against any of the Ten Commandments. It wouldn't be consistent. So we begin then. What does this charity, what should it motivate you to? In doing the will of God, what are you going to have to show for it? Okay? I mean, you can well imagine that we can sometimes fool ourselves into thinking we love God much more than we actually do. That's the simple fact of it. Sometimes we can fool ourselves into thinking we love God more than we really do it in life. And so to kind of keep us in check, keep us honest, then you have to say, well, if I love God as much as I say I do, what do I do to show? And my neighbor as myself, second part of it. What do I do? Because you can't just say, well, I love God with my whole heart and all this kind of stuff, but I don't do anything. I don't help my neighbor, I don't pray, whatever. Those two statements are not consistent with one another. Loving God and not doing anything to show it. Okay. I drink eggnog. This means I love God.
Monsignor, does neighbor here refer to everybody?
Everybody. Yeah, it's not like next door neighbor. It's everybody with whom pretty much you have contact, and maybe even some you don't. It's just your fellow human beings.
So every single person.
Oh my goodness. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Carrie. Happy birthday to you. And many more. Oh my goodness. He'll be insufferable for a week. Duty first. Okay. So, anyway, if you say you love God and you have all this charity and you love your neighbor as yourself, then you've got to have something to show for it. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense that you love God with your whole being and your neighbor as yourself and you don't do anything to show it. Okay? And some people will go, well, I go to Mass. You have to go to Mass. That's an obligation. That's not expressing your marvelous charity for yourself or your neighbor. In fact, your neighbors prefer you probably didn't, depending on, certain things. But you've got to have something to show. So we begin then with, how do we show that we love God, and especially how do we show we're obeying God's command to love our neighbor as ourselves, to do unto others as we would have them do unto us? What are the primary ways we do that? And the primary ways that we can do that are called the works of mercy. As you know, Papa Bergoglio has declared that we're in this wonderful year of mercy, right? Mercy, mercy. So, we should know then, which he probably doesn't even know, the works of mercy and what they are. I bet you dimes to donuts he couldn't even list them. But here we go. Anyway, the works of mercy are divided into two types. There are what they call corporal works of mercy, so named from the Latin corpus, which means the body. And in these acts of mercy, we help people in bodily things, okay? The others are called the spiritual works of mercy, in which we aid people spiritually in one way or another. So let's look into what exactly they are. There are 7 of each. And so we'll start with the corporal works of mercy from corpus. So, to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to visit the imprisoned, to shelter the homeless, to visit the sick, and to bury the dead. Now, these are the classical 7 corporal works of mercy. It is not always possible in circumstances to do them exactly the way they're listed. But the way they're listed allows for other things that come under that work of mercy, okay? So what I mean, for example, is to clothe the naked, for example, okay? In the old days, or maybe even now in certain parts of Africa or India or something like that, there probably are real naked people running around, all right? Because they have no money to put on some kind of clothing. And in that case, if you're there and you help to clothe a real naked person, then that's literally fulfilling this. On the other hand, we probably won't have the occasion to have to clothe many really naked people in Southern California, or they don't need clothes much anyway because of the weather. But you know what I mean is, we want to fulfill that work of mercy, but you're going, well, how can I do it? I don't see any naked people. Well, I know, huh? So, but you do it by, let's say you clear out your old clothes and you give them to a charity that like Catholic Charities or something, that will get them to people, homeless, whatever, that actually need clothing. Or you see homeless people yourself and you say, could you use a nice jacket in this weather here, or whatever, give them or go buy them something. It doesn't even have to be your old clothes. Go buy them some socks or something and say, here, it looks like you could use these. And so that is fulfilling the work of, that is doing the work of mercy of clothing the naked without really clothing physically, directly a naked person. Okay, so, and all of them have some kinds of, adjuncts to them. Feeding the hungry, you could see somebody that needs food and feed them. Or you could donate to a place like, St. Anthony's Soup Kitchen or something that provides food for people who are really hungry. Except for the odd homeless person or whatever. Most of us will not see physically somebody who is actually hungry and has no means to be fed or feed themselves. So, but it doesn't diminish the necessity for us to do the works of mercy. And we do the works of mercy because God said to, but also to gain merit for our own souls. The more we do the works of mercy, the more grace we get from God, and the more we please Him. So, feed the hungry, okay. Give drink to the thirsty. That comes under the same kind of thing, really, some hungry and thirsty. Clothed and naked, did that one. Visit the imprisoned. Now, I can tell you, even as a priest, it is so hard to get into a prison to see somebody. I mean, we've had people of ours in jail from time to time, and the number of hoops you have to go through, it's kind of ridiculous. I remember when I was first starting out in seminary, one of our deals was to visit prison. You just went to the prison, you signed a sheet, and you went in. And that was like 1980, whatever, right? 1982 or so. Well, since then, it's like, no, we need a sample of your brain tissue and, all this kind of stuff. But there are other things. There are people who are imprisoned either rightly or wrongly, and I'm sure there are ones, and I know there are ones who are very sorry. You can write to them, or whatever. If it's a relative or something, you could actually visit them if you go through the hoops and whatnot. I was going to say you can make rosaries for them, but actually, about halfway through the last time I visited a prison, apparently the guys, the prisoners, whatever they call them, inmates, they were strangling each other with some of the rosaries we had given them. So then we had to make the rosaries out of thread that broke really easily. So if they wrapped it around somebody's neck and pulled, it wouldn't actually strangle. I know. So anyway, shelter the homeless. Literally not a good idea. I have to say, it's in there, yeah. But literally taking one of these guys, with the shopping cart, talking to himself, and say, would you like to come to live with me? But once again, donation to a charity that does take care of people who are indigent and in need. Yeah.
Going back to visit the imprisoned, could a shut-in person or somebody that's been out of the house, would that be considered?
Well, there we have number 6, you see, though.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Well, they're not sick. But anyway.
A shut-in that isn't sick?
Uh-huh.
Then is what?
Prison.
Too fat to get through the door? Huh?
Some priests are in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, fine with the
You go deal with that, all right?
Why was sale?
Bye.
I didn't even get there to sale.
They're usually not there because they were overly traditional, though, Okay, so and the final one, to bury the dead. Frankly, this may come in as a real option in many of your lives here, many of our lives. There is a revolting tendency since the 1983 Code of Canon Law, well, a disaster of a canon law, just a disaster, okay, contains things contrary to the faith. And, other things that are just awful. So traditionally, Christians have always buried the dead. Our dead have always been buried, in a vault, in the ground, whatever. Now, the 83 Code said, that if you do it for reasons not contradictory to the faith, then you can go ahead and be cremated. Now, never in 2,000 years, it was forbidden under the 1917 code and previous codes, which were in effect until 1983. Not only did it say it's a good idea to be buried, Catholics were forbidden to be cremated. You couldn't do it. It was contrary to the principles of the faith. So anyway, come along, the 83 code, and it says you can do it. So now we're getting this thing where, oh well, I'm going to be cremated because, you know, it's cheaper and that'll leave more money for my kids, you know, and this kind of thing. Well, really? No. If you have the money in your estate, you get buried. Yeah.
What if it's not your decision, but you die and one of your family members?
Well, what are you going to do about that? But that's why, just don't die before you've written down that you don't want to be cremated, you know? It's like, yes, how old are you now? Okay, I know I'm only 15 at the time of writing this, but just in case anybody's interested, I want to be buried, and they're not that big, so it won't be very expensive.
Don't worry, Dave, I'll bury you.
Yes, don't worry, we'll take care of it. So, if there's any way to do it, now as far as having more money to leave to your kids, who cares? What are they going to do, have a bigger party?
So all of these spiritual, what are they called? Works and mercy.
Oh, the corporal mercy.
They also apply to dying enemies as well, right?
To dying enemies, like buries the dead.
Dying enemies.
Oh, sure.
Feeding your enemies, clothing them.
Yeah, well, you know, you love your enemies, bless those who persecute you. So, yeah, it does. I mean, but sometimes with your enemies, it's a little harder to do physically, if not morally speaking, to get yourself to that point.
Yes.
But your real enemies, you have to at least pray for them and wish their salvation. You know. So, anyway, about,
Can you, it used to be you couldn't be buried, a Catholic could not be buried in a non-Catholic cemetery. What's the deal?
Okay, if you, let's say you have a plot in, you know, the city cemetery, whatever, the civic cemetery. We come out there and we bless your grave. So your little, you know, plot becomes a Catholic cemetery at that point. Yeah, so we take care of that. But in any case, make sure you all specify you are not to be cremated because it is not the Catholic way. Even though it says you can be in the 83 code, it also adds a little thing, however useless it is, that it's not really the Catholic thing. It even says that in the 83 code. You can go ahead and do it, but it's not really the Catholic way to do it.
That's in the 1982 one?
83 code, yeah.
I know, Father, the Catholic cemetery is a big time cremation little vaults.
Oh, sure. Oh, they jumped on the bandwagon, you know? Yeah, of course they jumped on that bag. They have their own crematoria now. They have their own section for, as they say, cremains. You don't want to say ashes anymore now. You have to say cremains.
So in the 1917 canon laws, there's no exceptions?
Yeah, plague.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in times of pest or plague, when there's some communicable disease being spread by the bodies, you could burn them to control plague. What if you get plague?
No.
Oh.
So let's say someone gets cremated and then everyone gets cremated in their body. What happens then?
Well, God can put you together. There's no question about that. It's just not, because of the symbolism involved. You see, cremation is an essentially pagan practice. That's why Jews never did it. That's why Catholics never did it. It's what the pagans always did. The Romans, who were pagans, who worshipped all the gods and goddesses and, you know, fake gods and goddesses, that was their way, was to cremate. Like if you go to India, the Hindus and stuff, they always cremate. It's just a pagan practice that it's not that God can't reconstitute you at the end of the world. It's that the symbolism of your body was, it was animated by your soul, which was the enlivened by the presence of the Holy Trinity in it. So you were a temple. Your body was a temple that held the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost inside it as its lifeblood. And to just decide to burn it is thought of as somewhat a symbolic affront to that fact, if you kind of get me on that. So, yeah. And you get that question, what does, well, beyond any doubt, no matter how scattered and messed up you are, God's going to put you together somehow. But then again, your glorified body isn't going to really be the same body anyway, so maybe it makes that a better Play-Doh next time. Okay, just a few minutes left here. Let's continue. So, visiting the sick then, that's easy to see. You know somebody who's ill, go to the hospital, see what they might need or want. They want you to sit there and read a book with them for a while, or just visit, pray the rosary, whatever. Going and visiting the sick, whether they be at home or in a hospital, that's easy to do directly. Something you can act, one of the corporal works of mercy you can do yourself as described. So that doesn't take too much. And then burying the dead. So so make sure you all get buried, and don't try to save money for your kids, who neither will appreciate it, and it won't matter much to them anyway. So make sure you get buried. But also sometimes, you might have to help somebody with some finances or something for a funeral to get buried. Maybe somebody who couldn't afford it. And they're saying, well, if they don't come up with some money, all we can do is cremate this person. Well, if enough well-meaning Catholics who wanted to do the corporal works of mercy got together, they could finance it and have the person buried instead of cremated. So, all right, so those are the corporal works. Now we move on then to the spiritual works. And these are to admonish the sinner, instruct the ignorant, counsel the doubtful, comfort the sorrowful, bear wrongs patiently, forgive all injuries, and pray for the living and the dead. So first is admonish the sinner. Now, there's something we call there fraternal correction. And that really is what the first admonishing the sinner is talking about. But there are also considerations and guidelines for that. Because if you think that you're some sort of like Carrie Nation and have to go out and admonish everybody directly, it doesn't really work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work that way. When you are contemplating employing fraternal correction, which means usually you have a friend or a relative who is going the wrong way, who's starting to engage in stuff that you see as harmful to them. And I did this a zillion years ago. Even myself. Like my friends all started smoking pot. And I didn't, and I saw they were all becoming stupid and getting into different things. And finally I had to say something to them. And in a lot of cases they did stop. And it had an effect on them. So if you see something like that in one of your friends, whether it is pot or booze or just gambling or bad language, for example, okay, this thing is rampant. Or not going to Mass when they should be going to Mass, or not going to confession. In somebody you know, this is the key, because doing it with somebody you don't know at all is usually not going to end up very successful. But somebody you know or are related to. Then you have to think about what are my chances of success in this. And if at least they're not going to punch you for it, then you really are obliged by God to try to put them on the correct path by saying something. some people are too cowardly in this regard. Oh, I can't say anything, We never discuss God, or something, And they shirk their duty. If you're not going to say anything to one of these people who's doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, whether it be a vice or language or this kind of thing, then who's going to do it? Do you expect this note on a parachute is going to drop out from heaven and say, dear Johnny, you've got to stop gambling, love God. You're the instrument of that. You are the one God is working through at that point. And that is it. That is one of the commandments to do the spiritual mercy that we have. Moral commandments, if not one of the 10 commandments. One thing I wish people would do more about is the bad language thing. There's a thing I call construction language, okay? Because construction workers, right, they all get on the job and they go, hey, hand me some of that blip, 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 and that blipping thing, and this blip, and that blop, and blip, and expletive deleted. Because they think they have to. They're working with guys, and they think they need to throw in these words. Well, one thing I can tell you is that guys do not respect you more because you're using that language. And in fact, they most likely, if you stop using it, will respect you more. If anything, they respect you less. And you have less heavenly honor for using that kind of language. Why? Well, even though some of it is completely meaningless. A lot of swear words they're just swear words, but they don't really mean too much when it comes down to it, at least not literally. But it's an abuse of speech. Many things are wrong because it's an abuse of the reason God gave it to us. So think about speech. We're the only ones with speech, in spite of like Jane Goodall and all these people that tell us that chimps and gorillas and stuff have speech. They don't. Okay? They may be able to communicate by some special grunt that a lion is on its way to eat them. But that isn't speech. Okay? Only humans have true speech. And God gave it to us. It has to be, you have to reason first of all, for reasons that are consistent with doing His will. So, we can never use the speech for something that violates His will. We shouldn't use speech then to say swear words, because it doesn't communicate any truth about God, or any truth about anything, or even a neutral thing. It debases us. Furthermore, it causes scandal. There's nothing worse than somebody who's known to be a Catholic man or woman trying to be like everybody else and using bad words. And then they go, these Catholics, you see, they're just like everybody else. They use these words. They swear just like us. They're just as low as us. And that should never be said of anybody here. You aren't called to be one of the guys as far as swearing goes. You're called to lead spiritually by virtue of your superior spiritual knowledge and instruction. And if that doesn't reach inside your head. So watch out for things like construction language where you feel that you're obliged to use certain crass words and bad words because of the people you work with. It's a sin anyway. It's a sin of scandal and the sin of debasing your speech. And they won't start saying, hey Mike, why aren't you swearing like us anymore? Do you really think? They won't do it. They're going, wow, we just noticed he hasn't been like saying those words like we do. Well, maybe we'll try it, which is more like what'll happen. And you'll elevate everybody with you.
Going back to like the Monsignor, and you were talking about how we're instruments. Do you have friends or non-Catholic or Catholic, and there's certain things you can do and not associate with. So in that aspect, what do you do? I have a Catholic friend and I can't hang out with them really anymore because they're living in sin. What do you do in that instance? Just pray for them, or?
Well, no, but you see, if they were a friend, then you also have the further opportunity to say, I can't associate with you that much anymore because you are doing this. You are living in sin. And I have to distance myself from that. And you really need to think about what you're doing. You're offending God greatly. And I will still pray for you, but I can't hang around you like I used to because, that would sort of appear that I was approving of what you were doing.
You just tell charitably exactly what they're doing.
Charitably, flat out.
If you have
In fact, if you don't, it won't do much good because they'll just think, where's Sarah been lately? She hasn't called. I wonder why. I mean, they'll just be thinking that, It won't do any good spiritually. It won't be one of the spiritual works of mercy.
And if you have relatives that are not Catholic, then what do you do in that aspect?
Relatives that aren't Catholic?
Right, like for my case, my father's side, they're not baptized.
Well, if they never were Catholic, then you want to lead them to the faith. It's not like you don't associate with. Because if you don't associate with them, then how will they ever become Catholic? They'll have no example. So you do what you can. If they're gonna persist in some kind of blatantly pagan practice, then But if you don't have some contact with them, you're never going to get them around to the truth.
So they know not to cuss.
That's no excuse. You've got to stop swearing anyway.
I don't have that problem with people swearing, but there is another problem in the family. Is not construction language, but how do I say this? Vulgar. It's not swearing or construction language,
Right.
but it's just vulgar talking.
That's almost as bad.
It's not good.
Just because it's not including this word and that word doesn't make it not abusive language in a way. There's just certain things that we shouldn't go talking about. There's no excuse for being vulgar.
They say things like it's a joke, but it's not funny and it's vulgar.
Right, and dirty jokes are also an abusive.
Well, it's not a dirty joke.
No, but I mean,
Nobody in their right mind was to try that around me or swearing around me, but how do you correct this?
Look, I know a dirty joke. Man found the money. Forget it.
So what would be the best way to tell them, the people in the family who do this?
Just take them aside sometime if you have a chance and say, we should maybe elevate our speech a little bit. Remember that God and the angels are present in every conversation. And if you bear that in mind, there's a lot of things you won't say. Because it's true. At least your guardian angel is there. And trying to get you not to say those things. And God, of course, is always there. And your guardian demon is there to record the fact that you did talk that way so he could use it against you when he's witnessing for the prosecution at the end of your life,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I know it's a late. Let me just finish up, please. So, so instructing, we did admonishing the sinner. Now we'll just start with the 7 spiritual works next week. Okay. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Amen.